Have you ever looked at a crowd and felt nothing? Not because you're a bad person, just because you're tired. You're rushing to work, running errands, thinking about the next meeting, your next bill, your next problem. People become background noise. I was reminded of that recently while standing in line at a coffee shop. There was a mom in front of me with 2 young kids, and she looked exhausted. One of the children dropped a drink and juice just went everywhere. And just for a moment, her shoulders dropped. Not dramatically, just enough that you could tell that she was carrying more than anyone else around her realized. I didn't know her story, but suddenly I wasn't seeing a stranger. I was seeing a person. And that's what brings me to today's passage. Because the more I think about it, the more I realize that's exactly what Jesus did. He saw people, not categories, not interruptions, not problems. People. Welcome to Beyond Belief. Today, we're looking at one of the powerful moments in the Gospel of Matthew. 3 short verses, Matthew 9:36 to 38. And honestly, I think most of us have heard these verses talked about as a mission passage, as a church growth passage, an evangelism passage. But the more I sit with these words, the more I think they're really about something deeper. They're about the heart of Jesus. When I was younger, one of my uncles took me out to one of his fields. He stopped the tractor, pointed across the acres of land and said, "Look at that." I looked. I saw dirt, grass, a field. Nothing special. But he saw something completely different. He saw crops, provision, possibility. He saw a harvest. And years later, I think that's one of the lessons Jesus was trying to teach his disciples. 2 people can look at the exact same thing and see completely different realities. Maybe you've experienced that too. Maybe you've sat in your driveway after a long day and just stared through the windshield for a few minutes before going inside. Maybe you've walked through a crowded mall and felt strangely alone. Maybe you've been surrounded by people, but disconnected from all of them. Our world is more connected than ever. And somehow, many of us have never felt more isolated. We're tired, busy, overwhelmed, trying to hold everything together. Which is why Matthew's description feels surprisingly modern. I wonder if you've noticed this. We've become experts at curating our lives. We know how to post the highlight reel. We know how to smile in public. We know how to answer, "How are you?" with "good" before the question is even finished. But underneath all that, there's often a different story. A story nobody sees. A marriage that's struggling. A diagnosis nobody knows about. A financial burden that keeps you awake at night. A grief you haven't figured out how to put into words. And the strange thing is, everyone around us is carrying something too. Which means every crowd is filled with stories we'll never fully know. Listen to these words. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Try to imagine that moment. The dust, the noise, the children running through the crowd, the sick being carried by friends, the religious leaders standing off to one side with folded arms, the fishermen, the mothers, the beggars, the curious, the skeptical. Hundreds of faces, maybe even thousands. And Jesus stops. Not because he needs a break, not because he feels overwhelmed, but because compassion won't let him keep walking. What fascinates me is what stopped Jesus. It wasn't the size of the crowd. It wasn't the chaos. It wasn't the need. It was compassion. Think about that. The one who created the stars looked at ordinary people and felt compassion. Not annoyance, not disappointment. Compassion. The Greek word describes being moved in the deepest part of yourself. Jesus wasn't observing suffering from a distance. He was entering into it emotionally. And then Matthew says something interesting. The people were harassed and helpless, worn out, knocked down, exhausted. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? The pressure to succeed, the pressure to perform, the pressure to appear okay even when you're not. The more I think about it, the more I realize Jesus wasn't just describing them, he was describing us. And here's the beautiful part. Jesus didn't see a problem to solve. He saw people to love. I think that's why this passage hits so deeply. Because every one of us wants to be seen. Not admired, not applauded, just seen. We want somebody to notice when we're struggling. Somebody to recognize when we're carrying too much. Somebody to say, I know you're trying to hold it all together. Maybe that's why people were drawn to Jesus. Because for the first time in a long time, somebody looked at them and saw more than their label. And that is still true today. There have been seasons in my own life where I've been the person in the crowd. Maybe nobody knew it. Maybe I looked fine from the outside. But inside, I was exhausted. Going through the motions, smiling when I didn't feel like smiling, showing up when I didn't have much left to give. And looking back, I realized something. Jesus wasn't disappointed in me in those seasons. He had compassion on me. And that changes everything. And then Jesus says something unexpected. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Now notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't call the crowd a burden. He calls them a harvest. The disciples saw demand. Jesus saw possibility. That's the difference between seeing a crowd and seeing a harvest. A crowd is anonymous. A harvest is valuable. A crowd is easy to ignore. A harvest demands attention. A crowd feels like a problem. A harvest feels like purpose. Jesus looked at the same people everybody else saw. The difference wasn't the crowd. The difference was his perspective. The disciples saw problems. Jesus saw purpose. The crowd hadn't changed. The perspective had. And maybe that's the question for us. What do we see when we look at people? A difficult coworker, or someone carrying pain, a frustrating family member, or someone longing to be understood, a stranger, or someone loved by God. Compassion begins when we choose to see people the way Jesus sees them. Not perfectly, but intentionally. The thing that moves me the most about this passage is that Jesus never asked his followers to do something he wasn't willing to do himself. He was the ultimate worker in the harvest field. He entered the world, carried our burdens, walked among the broken, pursued the lost, and ultimately gave his life for the people he loved. The workers are few, but the Savior was willing. And because he was willing, we can be willing too. So here's my challenge. Don't try to change the world. Just see one person. Really see them. Listen longer. Care deeper. Slow down enough to notice what everyone else misses. Because the harvest isn't somewhere far away. It's already around you. It's in your home, your workplace, your neighborhood, your church, your everyday life. And maybe you'll discover something surprising. The people you thought were interruptions were actually opportunities. The people you overlooked were actually the harvest. Maybe the goal this next week isn't to do something spectacular. Maybe it's simply to slow down enough to notice. To notice the co-worker who's quieter than usual. To notice the friend who's withdrawn. To notice the family member who's carrying more than they're saying. Because compassion almost always begins with attention. You can't love what you're not willing to see. You are seen. You are known. You are loved. And the people around you are too. The harvest doesn't need perfect workers. It just needs willing ones. May you see what Jesus saw. Not just crowds, not just interruptions, not just problems to solve, but people to love. May you notice the invisible burdens carried by people around you. May you have the eyes that look beyond appearances. May you have a heart that remains tender in a world that often grows cynical. May you remember that compassion is not weakness. It is strength under the influence of love. May you know that you are fully seen by God. Every fear, every struggle, every unanswered question, every hidden tear, none of it escapes his attention. May you find comfort in knowing that Jesus still has compassion on weary people. May you discover that you are both the worker and the harvest, called to serve, deeply loved, sent into the world, yet always held by the one who sent you. May you go into this next week with open eyes, open hands, and an open heart. And may you never forget, the harvest is plentiful, and God still uses willing people. Before you go, remember this. Stop praying for someone else to do it, because you are the someone else. The harvest is plentiful, and the field is ready. And Jesus is still teaching his people how to see. Until next time, keep looking, keep seeing, keep going beyond belief. God bless.